Welcome back. In this video, we're actually going to get the ball moving. So we're going to create a script, and that script will give us control of the ball. Now, first things first, if we hit the play here, we really haven't done anything to the ball. So as you see, it goes into the game window. I mean, obviously, I can't move it, and it's not moving. Now, Unity is a physics engine. If I say turned this, so I'm going to take the ground, and you don't have to do this. I'm just going to rotate it on one of these planes, and I think that will be okay. Let me just double check. Okay, so obviously it should sort of roll towards us with that. Now, if I hit play here, you might be a little disappointed. The ball doesn't roll. And so then you say, well, why isn't that? I mean, if this was a real life situation, the ground was tilted, and we had a spherical ball, we'd expect it to roll down. The reason is that that object does not have what we call a rigid body. And so if you go to player, it has a few different things, right? It's got that position we talked about. Now this has a mesh renderer, which allows it to be seen. If we turn that on and off, the ball disappears. Now it also has a collider. If I turn the collider off, then well, it still won't fall through the ground here, but that sphere collider gives it collision, so it would actually be interacting with the ground. What I don't have is something that will cause it to interact with kind of this force of gravity that exists in our game engine. So what I'm going to do is come down to the add component. And I've obviously searched for something before. There are lots and lots of sort of pre-made components we can add. Now, what I'm going to do is go down to the physics, and then somewhere along in here, there is rigid body. So I'm going to click on that. And the rigid body, and I always think it looks like a crash test dummy kind of symbol there, gives you things like mass, and it talks about using gravity, and so on. So this is what's going to help us out here. So now with that rigid body component attached to this, if I do hit play now, it will act as if gravity is there. Okay, so as you can see, that ball is moving towards me. It goes out of the screen because the camera isn't moving with it, but that's the big idea. So what we want to be able to do now is, just like gravity was able to push the ball down the hill, we want to be able to push the ball with the controllers, right, with our arrow keys. So what I'm going to do is just go back to our ground here and set that rotation back to 0. Okay, we don't need it to roll down the hill. But what we're going to do is, again, go back to the player. We're going to create a script here for the player. And basically, it's going to be our player controller script. And so what I'm going to do, just to keep things organized again, I'm going to go back to my assets here, and I'm going to create a new folder. And that folder we'll call scripts. And the idea, it's like a program, but it's just sort of adding on. It's adding a component. So script usually is a small little program. It's not a full thing. It doesn't create the whole game. It just sort of adds to that, in this case, the ball's functionality. Go into the scripts, right-click, create, and then somewhere on here, there it is, third one down, mono behavior script. I'm not going to go into explaining why it's called mono behavior. Just know that these are the scripts that we're going to use to add functionality. We double click on it. It creates this new behavior script. Probably a good idea. Now, usually I can change it right away. So let's just see. But anyways, I'm going to call it player. Whoops, if I can have my fingers in the right spot. Player movement. So again, a good name for that because it's going to control the player movement. Now, again, Unity doesn't allow us to control, type in the code. So when you double click on it, it should open up Visual Studio. This is a little bit different than Visual Studio Code, but similar. We'll give it a second here. And once that opens up, what we'll see is, and there it is. We see it sort of comes. Now, this is what I was fearful of. If this name and this name don't match up, we should make sure that it says player movement. Okay, now this is much sort of parallel with with Python because this is C# script, but there's a lot of similarities to Python, and Python is what you're used to. Up here it says using Unity Engine. Well, that is the idea of a library, right? It's bringing in the things that Unity can do. So we're going to be able to access different methods, different functions that sort of take along or use the Unity game engine there. Now we created a class. Don't worry too much about this. We haven't created we haven't talked about object-oriented programming, but it's player movement. And then we have two functions. One is called start and one is called update. And they give you a little bit of an idea. Start is called right at the beginning of the game. Update is called every frame of the game. So anything that we need to sort of, set things up, we will put into the start. And then everything that we need to sort of be constantly checking, we will place in the update. Okay? So what we want to first do, as I said, is sort of be able to push that. Now, to be able to push the object, we're going to have to get access to the rigid body. So what I'm going to do is come right underneath this first opening parenthesis, okay, or curly brace, I should really say, and we're going to create a couple variables to sort of hold things. First thing, I'm going to create an RB, and it's helping you out. Sorry, I want to call it rigid body first. I'm getting confused here. Rigid body, and we're going to call that RB, okay? So that RB stands for rigid body. Then we're going to create two float variables. So actually, we'll leave that. We'll leave that there. I think we'll just leave that here for the moment. And then we're going to come into the start, and now the rigid body is empty. We haven't assigned it to anything. So what I'm going to do is go RB, and you can see that it's sort of helping me out here. What it's doing is grabbing that component. So it's looking onto the object that the player movement's on, and we'll drag this script onto that in a minute. And then it's looking for the rigid body script, okay? Or the rigid body component, and grabbing that component. Now we have access to it. So that's good, okay? So now we've got access to it, and that just did it right at the start. Now, from now on, we can access the rigid body component. In the update, now I'm going to make a little change here. Instead of regular update, we're going to use fixed update. And what fixed update does is it just sort of slows down the update to run at the speed the physics does. And I believe the physics runs at about 20 frames per second. And so in our case, because we're going to be moving the ball around, we don't want to move it when the physics isn't working, okay? When it isn't checking for collisions, for example. And so it's better to put this into fixed update. Otherwise, you end up with weird things like things falling through walls or moving through walls. We're going to create two variables. Both are floats. One's called move horizontal. And what that will do is it will access the input library. And we're going to use this input.getAccess. And we're going to call this horizontal. And I'll explain this in a minute. And then we're going to look at the other one, and we'll call this move vertical, and we'll also do the exact same thing, and we'll access the vertical component. Okay, so what that's going to give us is basically variables to hold the values that will come out of these arrow keys. So the input get access horizontal maps the arrow keys to this sort of horizontal sort of axis, and then that way we can read what's coming off that axis and save it into a variable called move horizontal. Now to see that axis, we can go back into Unity and sort of see what's going on here. So if I go under Edit, and I believe it's under Project Settings, there will be one here that's called the Input Manager. And so, like it says, this is where you can configure things. Now, there is a different one, but we are going to continue using this. And under the axis here, there is the horizontal and there is the vertical. And if I open one of these up, you can see the name. So the spelling of that name horizontal is very important. If it's not working, double check your spelling. And you can see here, the negative button is left, the right button, the negative button is left, the positive button is right, and that refers to the arrow keys. You can see there's an alternate key, A and D, which makes sense if you want to play the WASD keys. And then you can see there's a few things here. This is to kind of simulate more like an analog stick versus just sort of a digital on and off kind of thing, right? So that's what's going on there. Don't worry about changing any of those values. Same thing with the vertical, the only difference being the keys, right? So otherwise the settings are the same. So if you spell these right, then horizontal will work for the left and right, and vertical will sort of go, with the up and down arrows there. Okay, let's actually get this moving because we want to actually see this ball moving. So I'm just going to close this back up. Well, we'll just close it, I guess, and then go back to the Visual Studio here. I'm going to put in 2 more pieces of code. One is, it's going to be a vector 3. And a vector 3 refers to x, y, z. And basically, we're going to push this ball in a direction here. So a vector 3 movement. And then we're going to say new vector 3. And don't worry too much about this. We'll sort of get understanding later. And then we're going to take our move horizontal. Move horizontal. That's going to be on our axis. We're not going to go up and down at the moment. So I'm going to set that to 0 and then move vertical. I'm just going to accept that. Now that gives us basically the arrow that's going to push it, okay? So we'll talk more about it in class, but that's kind of the idea. And then here, the RB add force movement, I'm going to accept that. That's going to actually do the pushing, okay? Now there's a bunch of different things you can do to the add force, so I'm just going to get rid of that for a second, or sorry, to the rigid body. And you can see it makes all those suggestions, but the one we want is the add force there. Okay, let's actually go back and make this work before the end of this video. I'm going to hit save here. So save, that's an important thing. Make sure you've saved, because if you don't, Unity won't know that you've changed it. So I click on that. It might take a second or so for it to bring that in. Looks like it's okay here. Now, if I hit play, it's not going to work because the player does not have this component added to it. So we need to drag the script on. And if there's no errors, it should add without problem. Then, if you hit play, okay, it might take a second. Now, I should be able to use my arrow keys. Make sure I'm clicked in there. Okay, now for some reason, I am getting an error here. So I'm just going to stop it. Oh, okay. This is interesting. This is an update here. So it says you have switched to input handling to input system in player settings. So I have to go back and switch so that we're back to that other one. There was something that I read there, right? This is where you can configure, but you have switched input handling to input system in your player settings. The input manager will not be used. Okay, so we need to go to player settings and we need to switch this. So just give me a second here. Okay, so as I was in player settings, you need to click on other settings. Okay, so it will look like this when you get to player. Click on other settings and scroll quite far down here. And you will find wherever that was. Sorry, too far down. Okay, right here. Active input handling. And we need to change it from the input system package, new, to the old. We'll use the old. So we'll apply that. Okay, and save. Good. Okay, so hopefully, it's going to open things back up again. Live and learn. Things always change. Give it a second here. I'm just going to pause this. All right, hopefully that fixed the problem. It looks like it did. It had to restart a couple times. So I'm just going to close up the project settings here, hit play. Now I'm not getting any errors. That's good. And I'm going to make sure I sort of clicked into the window. I'm pressing the arrow keys. And yes, the ball is moving. Okay, so now I can sort of control the ball. Now it's a little slow. So in the next video, we'll fix that up. And then we'll do a couple other things, like maybe we'll put some walls in. That's probably what we'll do there. Later on, we need to get the camera system working as well, because obviously if I sort of move too far off or whatever, that ball will just sort of disappear from the camera, and that's not too useful. Yeah, we don't want it falling off, but we also don't want it going out of the camera view. Oops, oh, there it is. Whee! Okay, so we will continue with this in the next video.